Welcome back to the 4Ps. This is episode 143. And let's start by wishing everyone a happy Valentine's Day week, as well as wishing my mom a happy 75th birthday. She actually may have been the last person we know to have their birthday in the quarantine. And while we couldn't do a drive-by surprise like we did for my dad's 75th birthday, I asked all of her friends and extended family to upload videos to create one of those video hug montage collections. And let me tell you something. The amount of IT tech support that I needed to do to get all of these people, ages, let's just say 60 and up, to get this thing to work, probably took about 50 years off of my life.
The 4Ps. Professional. Political. Practical. Personal.
And here we are. Doesn't it feel like Trump impeachment trials are like snowstorms? They just keep coming. Our second impeachment trial in less than a year is underway, though this one does seem a lot less exciting and equally unlikely to result in any meaningful, just outcome. But we trudge on. So let's start with something personal. And I could not be more excited or nervous for a big event taking place this weekend. On Sunday, Valentine's Day, one of my oldest, closest friends is getting married. Now, we all know the dangers of COVID weddings, but this one's going to be small, it will be brief, and it's going to be outdoors. We'll be masked, socially distant, and probably eager as all hell to go home and warm back up, especially since it's now calling for snow yet again. I mean, who gets married outdoors in February? I guess in times of COVID, that's what you do. But the warmth and love that will no doubt be in attendance will get us through. But more than the risks associated with potentially contagious gatherings, it's actually the wedding officiant that's making me nervous. It's the real source of my anxiety for this weekend's nuptials. No, I'm not afraid of a rabbi or a priest. This weekend, the power is vested in me. And with great power, I bear the serious responsibility of joining Lauren and Jeff in less than holy matrimony. Because thanks to 30 seconds and about $30 on the internet, I am actually licensed to perform weddings in the state of New York. The idea of getting ordained online to perform wedding ceremonies seems like a ridiculous one. Of course, for others, the idea of spending years of academic and philosophical pursuit of studies to become ordained as a rabbi, minister, or priest might be just as absurd. But I am grateful and humbled to have been asked to officiate this ceremony. But I also realized that they were looking for this to be a solemn affair, I probably would not have been their choice. So now the pressure is on to make this fun but sweet, but entertaining but meaningful, but thoughtful but memorable, but COVID sensitive, but all encompassing. I'm psyching myself out. As a minister in the Universal Life Church, I really should get that down. It's a non-religious yet grounded organization that believes in the spirituality of the human connection. I've been asked to do these before, but this one feels different on many levels and for many reasons. So if anyone's got any good ideas or advice or tips or jokes to throw in, I'm open to suggestions. And something professional. And our now ex-Revelation team has been integrating into the broader Jellyfish organization for several weeks now. And we're beginning to get settled, figure some things out. Of course, we're still adapting to new processes and tools and even capabilities, as well as getting to know the many talented people in this organization across the world. What's been especially interesting for me as a longtime manager and leader at different organizations, it's Jellyfish's matrix model. It's one that I've never experienced in a corporate environment before, but certainly eager and interested to learn how it works. In this model, as an organization, there are no direct line managers. Capability leads will drive discipline growth and innovation. Client-focused teams will work across capabilities on different projects. And every employee has this support network, right, of peers, but HR and finance to help navigate the day and the year. For everyone who is joining this organization, it means that we are rethinking how we communicate and collaborate and ask for help, but also plot out our potential. And it got me thinking a lot about both traditional and non-traditional management, as well as everything I've formally and informally learned over the years. And the question that I've been pondering is, no management better than what's typically bad management? And the answer is definitively yes. Look, at companies across the world, bad management is so prevalent that it's led to an entire industry, like management training and coaching. There are thousands of books that have been written on the subject. It's often so bad that workplace studies show that the most useful thing a manager can often do to help employees is simply to leave them alone when they're working productively, rather than offering any misguided advice or help. Workplace culture, along with other factors, has taught managers bad habits. And once poor management techniques become habitual, they can become difficult to do away with. The reason why management breaks down so often is that most managers care more about their own individual success than that of their team. It's that simple. They don't realize that their own success is tied to the growth and development of their employees. Those in management may not admit it or even realize it, but they're usually self-focused, even if they really do have good intentions. The whole idea of the American dream doesn't encourage managers to prioritize the success of others over their own, and certainly doesn't incentivize the elimination of direct line management as an organizational priority. For decades, probably centuries, mid and even senior level managers learned that not rocking the boat and avoiding any expressions of frustration was the way to get ahead in the workplace. To climb up the corporate ladder to positions of senior management or executive or you chairman of the board, right? You'd need to stay in your lane, stay in line. Most workplace cultures breed pretense. They frown on dissent and they expect perfection from imperfect humans. The current corporate culture perpetuates a constant need to self-promote and self-protect. It can be exhausting. So the next question that we have to ask ourselves is, how can you still challenge the ideas of those who are senior in an organization when we feel like our needs in the workplace aren't being met? Another reason why management breaks down, honestly, it's deceit. It's unfortunately become a core management characteristic of so many bad managers. Huge amounts of time and energy are devoted to it. And management may deceive employees about how much they care or whether they're even open to feedback. Managers may ask for opinions or appear engaged or nod their heads to show that they're listening or that they understand. But more often than not, their mind is already made up when it comes to decisions. They'll often invoke the voice of powerful authority to get their own way. My friend, who is an incredible leadership coach, Vips Kapadia, right? He would call this exerting positional power. But really, if you think about what I'm now learning and immersing myself in, it's a multi-directional approach that breaks down hierarchies and frees us from what would have been this manager-employee relationship. And unlike the traditional one-way performance reviews that we've all been a part of, whether on the giving or receiving end, feedback from a number of senior and peer and even junior colleagues can create a better conclusion about how to improve, how to grow. It's a big shift away from the traditional way of doing things, but the impact of an honest exchange on personal relationships and business productivity will make this completely worthwhile. Most managers mean well, but they're often too distracted by their need to succeed and the pressures that come along with that. Thus, they fail to fulfill the responsibilities of supporting the people they manage. Changing mindsets takes time, but my goals this year will be to fight the urge for immediate results, to manage my own expectations of perfection, and limit the association of this idea of punishment with accountability. Now, something political. And if you live in New York or New Jersey or California, chances are you've heard of the SALT tax. Now, my congressman here in New York on Long Island, Tom Suozzi, has been leading the charge against this SALT tax for several years now, and even collaborating with other elected officials in a bipartisan way to bring about its repeal. The problem is the rest of the country. So, what is it and why does it matter? It was passed at the end of 2017. It's the State and Local Tax Act, establishing a new limit on the amount of taxes that can be deducted in your federal returns. So now, with this Trump-era law still on the books, we can only deduct up to $10,000 for state and local taxes from our federal taxes. Now, many areas of the country pay far more than that, and some states have even tried to create workarounds to help. But this is something that crushes middle-class taxpayers, as well as a lot of the wealthy Americans, although we're not as concerned about them. Essentially, it punishes voters and taxpayers in some states to pay for Trump's $1.5 trillion tax cuts that he gave to corporations a couple years ago. Many Democrats have been trying to restore unlimited SALT deductions, but it's politically divisive because pushing for its repeal would require Democrats to vote for something that could also be perceived as a tax cut that helps the rich, even though it's helping so many more people. And, well, listen, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has said that getting rid of the SALT deduction cap would be among his top priorities, even as late as last week. But it's more challenging for Democrats in low-tax states, where few voters end up owing more than $10,000 in state income and property taxes. My Congressman Suozzi fought vocally to repeal this in its entirety, and he said that the SALT tax deduction really should be based on economic fairness, right? You shouldn't be taxed on taxes that you've already paid. So the next few weeks and potentially months, depending on the legislative agenda, will be quite interesting, as a SALT repeal would likely be part of broader, more sweeping reform legislation. And something practical. And this one may feel a little bit painful for you, and you may question whether it's actually valid or not. But since the inauguration of President Joe Biden, which is fun to say, I found myself pulling back from reading and watching the news every day. Sure, I've been busier than ever with an uptick of work. And don't get me wrong, I still wake up in the morning and I reach for my phone. I spend a few minutes catching up on Twitter, and peruse some key headlines and updates. But I also find myself using that time to read more thoughtful newsletters or human interest pieces and even books. Some people actively seek out the news. Others let it find them. But the news really is everywhere now, especially if we're walking around with a device all the time. It starts with curiosity, right? We consume and then we want to consume more. But then some frustration sets in because there isn't enough time to consume everything that we find interesting. In the past, reading the news made you worldly or knowledgeable and look sophisticated when you've got that broadsheet newspaper wide open sitting with your legs crossed. It connected us to things that happened all over the world. But bad, scary, frustrating, and annoying news is pouring in throughout the day, especially now more than ever. And we've become distracted. It's become an addiction. What was once a compartmentalized way to absorb and consume the news has blended together, right? You got your politics and business and sports and entertainment, and they're all some ways interrelated. So right after the election, I pulled back. In the time since, I've truly seen how detrimental it can be and was for me, for even our mental and physical health. The news itself can act like a drug. There's a barrage of inputs that rewires our brains, and not always in a positive way. For those of us who bounce around from headline to tweet to snippet and back again, we become more multitask-oriented and less capable of focusing and thinking critically. The part of our brain where attention spans and morality comes from, it's called the anterior cingulate cortex. It begins to deteriorate. And then, like a negative feedback loop, we gravitate towards the crap that we can digest without requiring or needing any strenuous brain power. We can no longer read beyond the headlines. Our attention spans have grown shorter. we've actually become less thoughtful. Why? Well, the news business is a business. The industry has evolved to maintain our attention as a means of generating revenue. Catchy headlines have always been used to sell newspapers, but now that's also being used to attract clicks and traffic to a website. It drives advertising revenue and or subscriptions and keeps the companies in business. There's a reason why the New York Times' relatively new CEO, Meredith Levien, ascended into her role from the business and revenue and operations side of the company and not the news division. Now, they talk about a separation of church and state, but journalists also want to and need to stay employed. For far too long, most news has been bad news. It seems more relevant and essential for our own evolutionary survival, right? Like knowing what the danger is helps us to avoid it. Now, scientists believe that this negativity bias is twice as impactful as getting positive information. Now, if you're following the logic, the news is bad for our health. How many times have we been on vacation in some remote place, disconnected from the news, and start to feel better and come home feeling like some sort of toxins have been removed from our body, liberated, more relaxed, more hopeful about the world? It's one of those things where if you know things, right, you feel connected, but it's quite another to be consumed by them. So what good does knowing about a devastating hurricane in the Gulf do if you're unwilling or unable to actually help in any way? Does it matter to learn that the polar ice caps are the warmest they've ever been if you're not curious enough to dig deeper and understand the impact of man-made climate change on global weather patterns? I've read from many mental health coaches recommending to just push through 30 days of no news, or delete the news apps and Twitter, avoid television and newspapers. And me telling you to cut out the news, to cut yourself off completely, it's unrealistic. There's a reason that you're watching this, because you're interested in information. But what about establishing personal news breaks? Maybe one day a week you don't consume and you do disconnect. How about limiting exposure to a certain time limit, 30 minutes a day of external news? News breaks are better than breaking news. Or another practical tip for breaking up with the news is to allow yourself only to ingest and receive information about certain topics. It could be work-related or something diversionary like sports or music. Warren Buffett calls this his circle of competence, right? The only thing that he reads is about the stock market. So you could do that, or you could limit your news diet to just some sort of weekly digest or roundup of more focused news on specific topics or from trusted journalists, thus blocking out all other outside noise. Of course, if all else fails, complete news abstinence should be considered, but really only as a last resort. In the meantime, happy Valentine's Day, and thank you for spending some time here with me this week.